Welcome to our deep dive into family caregiving. We're going to, really explore the emotional side of things, those moments where you feel overwhelmed, maybe a bit lost, and how to bring some order to all the chaos, especially for those of you juggling caregiving with, well, everything else life throws at you.
Yeah, and acknowledging that right from the start is so important because, think about it. 21% of American adults are in the caregiving trenches right now. It's huge.
Wow, 21%. That's a lot of people.
It's a massive and often invisible workforce. And we hear from so many caregivers who, well, they feel like they're just barely keeping their heads above water.
I can imagine. It's like suddenly being handed this giant, complicated puzzle, except the pieces keep changing shape. There's no instruction manual.
You're exactly right. It's a perfect analogy. And then on top of that, you're dealing with the emotional weight of it all. You're worried about your loved one. You're trying to figure out the best way to care for them. And often you're neglecting your own needs in the process.
Which is exactly why we're here today. We're going to unpack some of those common challenges caregivers face. We'll explore a framework for understanding the different stages of this journey, and we'll offer some practical tools for not just surviving, but thriving as a caregiver.
And one of the most powerful tools we've found is the concept of care sheets. Think of it as your data-driven caregiving ally. They can help you organize information, track appointments, medications, care needs, even those little details you're always trying to remember but slip your mind when you're exhausted.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Data-driven caregiving, it sounds a little counterintuitive, like bringing spreadsheets into this very personal and emotional space.
I get that, I do, but hear me out. Imagine having all those crucial details right there at your fingertips, instead of swirling around in your already overloaded brain. Care sheets can bring a sense of order to the chaos, reduce mental clutter, and even help you spot patterns or potential issues early on.
So it's not about replacing that human touch with, cold, hard data, but rather using data to support and enhance the care you're already providing.
You got it, exactly. And it can be a game changer in terms of reducing stress and improving the quality of care you're able to give. But before we dive into the specifics of care sheets, let's go back to those emotional challenges we touched on earlier.
Yeah, because let's be real, it's not just about logistics, right? It's about navigating this whole complex web of emotions, often feeling like you're on a roller coaster you didn't exactly sign up for.
Absolutely. And one of the most common experiences we hear about is, burnout. Think about those statistics. 53 million caregivers in the U.S., providing an estimated $470 billion in unpaid care every year.
Wow, that's just mind-boggling.
It's massive. It's a massive responsibility. And it's no surprise that so many caregivers are, they're feeling the strain.
Okay, so burnout is a big issue. But how do you actually know if you're experiencing it? What are the signs?
Well, it can manifest in different ways for different people, but some common red flags are, feeling constantly exhausted even after sleeping, becoming more irritable, maybe shorter tempered than usual, withdrawing from social activities you used to enjoy, feeling a sense of dread or hopelessness about the caregiving situation.
It sounds like burnout can really sneak up on you, especially when you're so focused on caring for someone else. It's easy to push your own needs aside. Tell yourself you'll deal with it later.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of these signs, to have strategies in place to combat burnout right from the beginning.
Which brings us to the C.A.R.E.G.I.V.E.R stages. I've heard people talking about this framework, but can you break it down for us? What is it? And how can it help caregivers navigate this whole thing?
So the C.A.R.E.G.I.V.E.R stages, it's like a roadmap for understanding the different phases of the caregiving experience. It all starts with C for consideration, that moment when you realize that caregiving is on the horizon and you're just hit with a tidal wave of emotions and information.
It's like being dropped in the deep end of the pool and you don't know how to swim.
Exactly. There's just so much to process, from understanding your loved one's diagnosis and needs, to navigating the healthcare system, insurance, and even legal considerations. And while you're doing all of that, you're trying to deal with your own feelings about this new reality.
And that's just the first stage.
Oh, yeah. Next comes A for adjustment. This is when you're really jumping in, learning the ropes, figuring out routines, juggling new responsibilities. It can feel so overwhelming, like you're learning a whole new language and skill set.
And I'm guessing this is where those care sheets we talked about earlier start to become a real lifesaver.
100%. Imagine trying to keep track of medication schedules, doctor's appointments, dietary restrictions, all the other details in your head. It's just a recipe for stress and burnout. Care sheets give you that central hub to store all of that, freeing up mental space and reducing the risk of making errors.
Okay, so we've got consideration and adjustment. What's the next stop on this C.A.R.E.G.I.V.E.R roller coaster?
The next stage is R. It stands for role reassessment. This is where things start to get, well, really personal. You're beginning to see how caregiving fits into your overall life. And it's often when those feelings of guilt and inadequacy can start to creep in.
Because you're not just a caregiver.
Right.
You might also be a spouse, a parent, an employee, a friend. And suddenly, all those roles are competing for your time and energy.
Exactly. And it's not uncommon for caregivers to feel like they're failing in one or more of those areas. They might feel guilty about not spending enough time with their kids or feel like they're not doing a good enough job at work.
It's like trying to juggle a dozen flaming torches while riding a unicycle. So how do you navigate this stage without losing yourself in the process?
That's where self-care becomes essential. We'll talk more about self-care strategies later, but for now, just remember that taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's absolutely crucial for sustainable caregiving.
So consideration, adjustment, role reassessment. The next stage is E for evaluation, right?
Right. Evaluation is all about stepping back and taking stock. What's working well in your approach? What could be improved? Are your loved ones' needs being met? And are you taking care of yourself?
It sounds like a good time to break out those care sheets and see what the data is telling you.
Exactly. Care sheets can be super helpful during this stage. They provide a visual representation of your caregiving journey. You can see patterns, identify any challenges, and even track your progress over time.
So it's not just about recording information. It's about using that information to actually make decisions and adjust your approach.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that evaluation isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. You'll revisit it throughout your journey as your loved one's needs change and your own circumstances evolve.
Okay, so we've covered the first four stages: consideration, adjustment, role reassessment, and evaluation. What's next in this C.A.R.E.G.I.V.E.R framework?
Next is G, and this one is often the toughest: guilt and burnout.
Oh boy, we were just talking about those. So what sets this stage apart?
Well, think of it as the culmination of all those challenges we've been discussing, the constant demands, the emotional roller coaster, the struggle to balance all those different roles. It can all lead to a feeling of overwhelm, exhaustion, and sometimes even resentment.
And those feelings of guilt can be especially just insidious, right? Like you're not doing enough, you're not being a good enough caregiver, you're failing your loved one somehow.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember that those feelings are not a reflection of your worth or your dedication as a caregiver. They're normal responses to what is a truly demanding role.
So how do you combat those feelings of guilt and burnout? Is it even possible to avoid them completely?
Well, avoiding them completely isn't always realistic, but there are definitely strategies to manage them, to minimize those feelings, and that's exactly what we'll dive into next time. We'll explore some practical tips for self-care, stress management, and navigating all those tricky emotions that are just part of the journey.
Guilt and burnout that so many caregivers experience. It's like the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, but it's so important to address.
It really is, and one of the most powerful antidotes to those feelings is self-care. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity, especially when you're feeling so overwhelmed and stretched thin.
I think a lot of caregivers hear self-care and they picture, bubble baths and spa days, which are great, but not exactly realistic when you're juggling a million other responsibilities.
All right. Self-care for caregivers is less about indulgence and more about those small, sustainable acts that replenish your energy and help you cope with the demands.
So what does that actually look like? Give us some examples. What are some of those small but mighty acts of self-care that caregivers can actually fit into their busy lives?
Well, let's start with something super simple: breathing. When you feel that tension rising, that sense of overwhelm creeping in, just take a few deep breaths. It sounds almost too basic, but it can really shift your mindset and calm your nervous system.
I'm a huge believer in the power of deep breathing. It's like a mini meditation you can do anywhere, anytime.
Exactly. And along those lines, short breaks throughout the day can be a game changer. Even 5 minutes to step away, have a cup of tea, listen to a favorite song, or just stare out the window can help you reset and come back with a fresh perspective.
It's like hitting that pause button before you hit your breaking point.
Precisely. And speaking of breaking points, let's talk about boundaries. This comes up a lot in the I stage for intimacy and boundary stage of the C.A.R.E.G.I.V.E.R framework. Learning to set healthy boundaries with both your loved one and with others is crucial for preventing resentment and burnout.
That's got to be tough, especially if you're used to putting everyone else's needs before your own.
Mm-hmm.
How do you even begin to set those boundaries?
It starts with recognizing your limits. What are you realistically able to do, both physically and emotionally?
Hmm.
What are your non-negotiables? Once you have a clear sense of your boundaries, you can start communicating them to others. Kindly but firmly.
And sometimes that means saying no to requests, even if it feels uncomfortable at first.
Absolutely. It's about prioritizing your well-being and making sure you have the energy and the resources to provide that sustainable care. And remember, setting boundaries is not selfish. It's an act of self-preservation.
So we've got breathing, short breaks, and boundaries. What other self-care strategies can you share?
Connecting with others is huge. It's so easy to isolate yourself when you're in the thick of caregiving. But reaching out to friends, family, or a support group can provide a much-needed sense of community and shared experience.
It's a reminder that you're not alone in this, that other people get it. And sometimes just venting to someone who understands can make all the difference.
Absolutely. And even if you don't feel like talking, just being around people you enjoy can lift your spirits. Go for a walk with a friend, grab coffee with a sibling, join an online community of caregivers, anything that helps you feel connected and supported.
What about those things that used to bring you joy? Those hobbies or activities that have kind of fallen by the wayside since caregiving took center stage. Is it okay to make time for those?
It's not just okay, it's essential. Engaging in those activities you love, whether it's reading, gardening, painting, or dancing. It can nourish your soul and remind you that you're more than just a caregiver.
I think a lot of caregivers feel guilty about taking time for themselves, like they should be dedicating every waking moment to their loved one.
And that guilt is understandable.
Yeah.
But here's the truth. When you take care of yourself, you're actually better equipped to care for others. It's like the oxygen mask on an airplane. You have to put yours on first before you can help anyone else.
Such a great analogy.
Yeah.
It all ties back to what we were saying earlier about self-care being a necessity, not a luxury.
Exactly. When you're feeling depleted and burnt out, you're not able to show up as your best self for your loved one or for yourself.
Self-care is really an act of love, both for yourself and for those you care for.
Beautifully said. And remember, self-care is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding what works for you, what brings you joy, what helps you recharge. Experiment with different strategies and don't be afraid to ask for help.
So we've covered a lot here. Breathing short breaks, boundaries, connecting with others, making time for things you enjoy. What else is crucial for navigating those feelings of guilt and burnout?
Challenging those negative thoughts is so important. Often those feelings of guilt and inadequacy come from unrealistic expectations or self-criticism.
It's like that inner critic that's always telling you you're not doing enough, you're not good enough.
Exactly. And it's crucial to learn to recognize those thoughts and to challenge them. Ask yourself, is this thought helpful? Is it based on facts or on my own insecurities? What would I say to a friend who is having these thoughts?
It's about treating yourself with the same compassion and kindness you'd offer to someone you love.
Yes. And remember, you're doing the best you can with the resources you have. Caregiving is a marathon, not a sprint. And there will be days when you feel like you're barely keeping your head above water. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're human.
So give yourself grace. Allow yourself to make mistakes and celebrate those small victories along the way.
Absolutely. And if those feelings of guilt and burnout persist, don't hesitate to reach out for professional support. Therapy, support groups, even online resources can provide valuable tools and guidance.
Those are all great tips.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious to circle back to those care sheets we talked about earlier. You've mentioned them a few times, and I'm really starting to see how they can play such a key role in reducing stress and improving outcomes.
They really can be a game changer, especially for those of you who are feeling overwhelmed and disorganized. Imagine having all the essential details of your loved one's care, their medications, appointments, contact information, emergency procedures, all neatly organized in one place.
It's like having a personal assistant for caregiving.
Exactly. And it can free up so much mental space, allowing you to focus on providing quality care and attending to your own well-being.
Okay, I'm sold.
Yeah.
But where do you even begin? What does a care sheet actually look like? And how do you create one?
There are different formats and templates you can use, but the key elements typically include things like medication schedules, dosage information, potential side effects, doctor's contact information, appointment dates, and times dietary restrictions, allergies, emergency contacts, and even space for any observations or concerns you have about your loved one's health.
It's like a comprehensive snapshot of their care needs all in one easily accessible place.
Exactly. And the beauty of care sheets is that they can be customized. You can use them to track anything and everything that's important to you and your loved one's care.
And they can evolve as your loved one's needs change too, right?
Absolutely. You can add or remove sections as needed. And you can use them to track your progress over time, identify patterns or potential issues early on.
I love that they're dynamic, not static.
Exactly. And they can be especially helpful for communicating with other caregivers or healthcare professionals. Everyone has the same information, reducing the risk of miscommunication or errors.
This is all making so much sense. But I know some caregivers might be thinking, I'm already overwhelmed. I don't have time to create and maintain these elaborate care sheets.
I hear that. But the truth is, care sheets can actually save you time in the long run. Think about all the mental energy you spend trying to remember appointments, refill medications, or track down contact information. Care sheets streamline all of that, reducing stress and freeing up time for other things.
Working smarter, not harder.
Precisely. And you don't have to do this alone. There are tons of resources available online, including pre-made templates and downloadable guides. You can even find digital care sheet apps that you can access on your phone or tablet.
And speaking of resources, I know you have a fantastic website that's packed with helpful tools for caregivers, including those care sheet templates.
We do. Head over to the caregiverdoula.care, where you'll find a wealth of information on caregiving, including downloadable care sheet templates, self-care strategies, and tips for navigating the different stages.
Awesome. So there's really no excuse not to give it a try. And for those of you who are already using care sheets, we'd love to hear about your experiences. Share your tips and strategies in the comments below. You know, we've talked a lot about the challenges of caregiving, those moments of just feeling completely overwhelmed, guilty, and burned out. It's almost like you can get stuck in this loop, battling those tough emotions.
Yeah, it's true. Caregiving can often feel like this uphill battle. But what I find fascinating is that even with all of those challenges, there's this incredible potential for growth and transformation.
Oh, okay. I like that. Tell me more. How can caregiving, with all its, demands and difficulties, actually lead to positive change?
Well, think about those C.A.R.E.G.I.V.E.R stages that we talked about. The last two stages, E for end of caregiving and R for renewal, I think those often get overlooked. But they hold so much potential for healing and even rediscovery.
It's not just about surviving the caregiving journey, but what happens afterward?
Right.
How do you navigate that transition, especially when you've, poured so much of yourself into this role?
Yeah. The end of caregiving, whether it's because your loved one recovers or there's a change in living arrangements or maybe just the natural progression of their illness, it can be really emotional. There might be a sense of relief, but also grief, confusion, maybe even a feeling of emptiness.
It's like graduating from a really, really intense course, one that's like consumed your life for months, maybe even years. You're proud of what you've accomplished, but you also feel a little lost, of what's next.
I love that. That's such a great way to put it. And that's where the R, that renewal, comes in. It's about taking all the lessons you've learned, all the strength you've developed during this whole journey, and applying it to the next chapter.
So it's not about erasing the whole caregiving experience, but finding a way to integrate it into who you are now. What does that actually look like?
Well, it might mean, rediscovering those hobbies you had to put on hold, reconnecting with friends, exploring new interests, even seeking out professional support to process the emotional toll that caregiving takes. It's about giving yourself permission to grieve, to heal, and to reimagine your life outside of just being a caregiver.
A lot of caregivers I've talked to worry about losing that sense of purpose, that connection they had with their loved one. How do you find new meaning, new sources of fulfillment?
That's such a great question. And I think the answer lies in recognizing those incredible skills, those qualities that you've developed as a caregiver. You've learned to be patient, compassionate, resourceful, and resilient. Those are invaluable, and you can take them with you into any area of life.
It's like you've been through this, intense training program. Now you have all this amazing skill set that you can apply to so many different things.
Exactly. Maybe you discover this passion for advocacy, for supporting other caregivers, for working in healthcare. Or maybe it's simpler. New ways to express yourself creatively, to connect with your community, or pursue those dreams you put on hold.
It's really about finding your own unique path, one that honors that caregiving experience, but also allows you to, grow and evolve.
I love that. Beautifully said. And remember, renewal isn't some destination, it's a journey. There will be ups and downs, moments of clarity and moments of uncertainty. Be patient with yourself, lean on your support system, and celebrate all those little victories along the way.
And I'll add, if those feelings of overwhelm or burnout come back, Remember those self-care strategies we talked about? Those are just as important now as they were during the more active caregiving stages.
Absolutely. Self-care, it's a lifelong practice, not a temporary fix. It's especially crucial during times of transition and change.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will carry with them?
That caregiving, even with all its complexities and challenges, can be a transformative experience. It's a journey that will push you, test your strength, and ultimately shape you into a more resilient, compassionate, and capable person.
And even when that active caregiving phase is over, the lessons you've learned, the connections, the love you shared, it all continues to ripple outward, impacting not just your life, but the lives of those around you.
So true. And if you can think of one small act of self-care that you can commit to today, something to honor your journey and nourish your well-being, what would it be? We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are so many resources available to support you every step of the way. Don't forget to check out the Caregiver Doula.care for those care sheets and other helpful tools to make caregiving a little bit easier and more organized.
Until next time, be kind to yourself, celebrate your strengths, and keep those connections strong.